understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged.
If you're listening to this, you are the resistance. The resistance.
We are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America.
It's a trap!
Before we begin, a message from our dear elected president.
This is Barack Obama. Let me be clear. What we have said is this. Please, do not listen to the Young Cons podcast.
I've got a very special guest today. Before I introduce him by name, I want to give you a little background. The New York Times reported him as someone who, quote, has quietly become one of the most influential people in America. Now, when the New York Times says that, you've automatically envisioned someone in your head, but this might surprise you. He's the author of the New York Times bestsellers, How Do You Kill 11 Million People?, The Noticer, and The Traveler's Gift. And Zig Ziglar once said he's the best speaker he has ever seen. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Andy Andrews.
Well, thank you, TJ. I never know what to say. You say nice things about me like that, introducing me. I'm like, can I give you my wife's phone number? Would you call my wife and tell her this stuff? So
yeah, I go, honey, come here. Hey, say that again.
Look, some people do think I'm pretty.
You're never gonna believe this. So, how are you?
I'm doing good. I am. I'm working hard, excited, and moving forward.
So people who haven't heard of you are rewinding and going, did he just say what I think he said? And I'll just tell you, I did. I'm curious. I've always wondered. I've had thoughts about doing this, but when I read the title of the book, I thought, how do you kill 11 million people?
It's an odd title, obviously. And I got to tell you that when I was writing the book, it's a short book. It's something you can read in 15 minutes. And when I was writing it, though, I was putting it in longhand. I had the idea, or had the kind of the answer come to me, and I started writing longhand. And I had this big wad of paper, and I was going through the Orlando airport, and the TSA agent zipped open my bag, and there, right on the top, is this wad of paper, and in big black letters, I had written, "How do you kill 11 million people?" And man, this lady looked up at me, and I was like, "Oh, wait, I'm a writer. I'm not a good one, but I promise I'm a writer."
That kind of puts the TSA agent in a tough spot, right? Because they have rules they're supposed to follow. And she's like, wait a minute. What did the manual say I do when someone wants to kill people? Think.
The question, it was the only title I really considered for the book. And I tell you why. Because the question is something that bothered me for years. I've always been interested in World War II, very interested, especially the Holocaust. But something always bothered me, and I never was really sure what was bothering me beyond the obvious. And I finally identified what was bothering me, and it was that question. How do you kill 11 million people? Now listen, I don't mean what method does somebody use to kill. We already know the methods that they use. And we're obviously talking about the Holocaust with the Nazis in World War II. But I'm not talking about what methods. We already know the methods. And I'm not saying, how do you kill 11 million people? How crazy do you have to be to do something like that?
Well, but those are important questions because...
Well, they are, but they've already been kind of answered, right?
Well, because I'm looking at it and saying, look, if I'm going to kill 50 people, not me, but the hypothetical, let's just call him an ISIS non-Islamic bomber or something, as Obama would say. If they want to kill 50, there's a means for that. It doesn't take a lot of planning or a lot of brain power. If you're the crazy Colorado guy and you want to do a movie theater, we've got that. But I mean, this is more of like an Ocean's 11, plan it out for months and make sure that you've tied off all ends, which is the kind of scheming that we're dealing with on a large scale. I mean, this is government, collusion, people forgetting they have principles type of plan that was in place.
So when I really started investigating this and looking at it closely, you look at old films of what was going on, and you see the Jews loading themselves onto trains, and there's relatively few Nazi guards, like a guy with a machine gun every 10 or 15 yards. And you look at that and you go, why don't they run? Why don't they fight? The guy who went into the movie theater in Colorado, I mean, let me tell you something. There is no way, I don't know how many people were in the theater, but there's no way he could have killed them all. Why? Because when he started shooting, People ran, people hid, somebody rushed him. And so how in the world do you manage month after month after month for years to get Jews to load themselves onto trains? How do you kill 11 million people? And I struggled with it for a while, but TJ, when I found the answer, it stunned me.
Tell us, how do you kill 11 million people?
Lie to them. That's it. Lie to them. When I found this answer, I kind of backed up on it because I said, surely it can't be that simple. And it also scared me because I knew it was a tactic being used by leaders today to get people into certain situations. And as I began to investigate this, and I'm probably the only person you have ever met who's read the Nuremberg trial transcripts, but when I began to
checking my contact list. Hold on a second.
Yeah,
I'm going to get back to you.
When I began to pull some threads on this and go down some rabbit trails, I found how this actually happened. And Adolf Eichmann, who was put in charge of the final solution, they called him the master. And Eichmann was the guy who concocted this whole way of doing things. And so it was literally a written policy of lies that he developed that, in an evil sense, were brilliant in their effectiveness. But it was three in a row. The first one was when they would circle the neighborhoods with barbed wire. Now, these later became known as ghettos, but they would circle them with barbed wire. They would tell them and make the announcement that this was being done for their protection. They didn't know where the front was. We're trying to keep families together, neighborhoods together, so that businesses would maintain some consistency. And so, it's the old thing that we hear from the government: we're doing this for you. This is all being done for you. But that was the first lie.
We're from the government, and we're here to help.
Yeah. So that was the first lie, that we're doing this for you. The second lie was very curious to me. What they would do is they would send local representatives and some Nazi party representatives into the ghetto, into the neighborhood, to meet with the Jewish leaders. And as they were meeting with the Jewish leaders, they would ask for and receive bribes. They would take bribes from these leaders, and the bribes were to be in exchange for better treatment, better food, to leave them alone, so to speak. And so the reason this was done is so that when they left, the Jewish leaders would get together and they would automatically conclude, okay, we're fine. They're not going to kill us, because if they were going to kill us, they could just take everything, and they certainly wouldn't, be taking bribes. And so, so we're fine. And so that was done just to calm them down so that they wouldn't try to escape or wouldn't riot. It was a lie for a specific purpose. And then the third lie was actually, written. I mean, I found the transcript of that lie, and it was something that Adolf Eichmann wrote, and he did it quite a bit. He did it personally, but then he also put it out to all the different leadership. And here's what it is. TJ, can I just read it? Just very quick.
Please.
It says they would on a certain day, they would pull a train up, or pull the train as near to the area as they could, and they would get all the Jews outside, and they would set up this little platform, and there would be less than 20 people. There would be local representatives there, Nazi party officials, and very few armed. It would be like 3 or 4 of them even had guns, okay? And here's what they would say. Jews, these are the exact words, by the way. Jews, at last it can be reported to you that the Russians are advancing on our eastern front. We apologize for the hasty way we brought you into our protection. Unfortunately, there was little time to explain. You have nothing to worry about. We want only the best for you. You will leave here shortly and be sent to very fine places indeed. You will work there, your wives will stay at home, and your children will go to schools. You will have wonderful lives. We will all be terribly crowded on the trains, but the journey is short. Men, Please keep your families together and board the rail cars in an orderly manner. Quickly now, my friends, we must hurry. And of course, they got their families together and they boarded the trains. They were already told that they would be crowded, and so they were crammed in there. And when the doors were shut and padlocked, at that point it was over, because those trains did not stop until they reached Sobibor or Treblinka or Auschwitz or Dachau or any one of the camps. You know, a list that was drawn up by the German ministry in 1967. I mean, this is their own people, drew up a list that named more than 1,100 camps and subcamps accessible by rail. And the Jewish Virtual Library shows a published list of 15,000 camps in the occupied territories.
Wow. And, you know, I just finished reading a book recently called The Measure of a Man, and it's about Martin Greenfield. He's a soup maker in New York. And I hadn't written too many personal stories about survivors of Auschwitz. I've had a few, but it was interesting because he talked about that when he got back from Budapest, Hungary, where he was visiting, he'd actually run away from home, ironically, almost on accident, but that's a different story. His father, who he hadn't seen in years, said, hey, you need to go out in the woods and take this gun. We've heard stories of the Nazis rounding up Jews, and we don't know what they're doing. And by this point, it had been going on for a few years. So as you tell that story, I think, you know, even years later, they knew it was bad. But he said when they showed up to the house, they had guns and they said, hey, we need you to get in the trains. There wasn't exactly the language of, hey, this is for your own good, and fathers cooperate. It was get on or you're in trouble, which is the understanding I've always had of it. But you know, I look back at the historical aspect, and it had been going, I mean, this is in the early 40s. I think he was in the camp for a year before liberation, so mid 40s. So we're, you know, close to a decade into this process of people being rounded up. And to me, that was just fascinating.
Yeah, it is amazing. And to see, you know, what's over there now. I do work for the intelligence communities occasionally, and have done some stuff with the tactics people in the military, and have been over to a lot of these countries, and on days where we, you know, had time to do whatever, you know, some of these guys and I have explored, and you know, everybody knows where Dachau is, everybody knows where Auschwitz is, but when you look at holy cow, you know, 1,100 camps just in Germany, and 15,000 camps. One of the things that people don't know is that at the end of the war, part of our treaty system required them to keep these camps up. And so at least one of every type of building in that camp area must be maintained. The grass has got to be mowed. And the barbed wire is still there on all these camps. Okay, but the one thing that we forgot to say in our treaty is we did not require them to provide signage or maps, and so literally you know, all these things are kind of in the woods. Most of them are in the woods, and so you can, if you don't know where they are, you're going to have a hard time finding them. It takes some time to find them. And some of these guys that I'd done stuff with, these military guys, have been over there for a while. They knew where some of them were, but they were explaining this to me, and I said, here, watch this. And we were like literally a half a mile from this camp, this like dirt road down to this thing. And we stopped, and there were some people walking by the side of the road, and they said, hey, where is the concentration camp? And they were like, we don't know. Concentration camp? We never heard of that.
It reminds me of another story, and this is fresh in my mind because I recently read it. But this gentleman who was in the camp, Martin Greenfield, you know, lost his entire family, 2 sisters, 1 baby brother, both of his parents, his grandfather and grandmother, and who knows how many other people that he knew. But the most interesting about it was he got to work outside of the camp at the local mayor's home, fixing bricks and helping. You know, they were getting bomb raided, so there was work to be done outside of the camp. And he had put on a happy face and was positive and was trying to survive. He went to the camp and he met the mayor's wife, who basically had him whipped for stealing rabbits. Oh, you know about this. Okay. And that was the first time he said the numbness that I had in the camp melted away. And I felt a I don't know if he called it a demonic angst or something inside of him. He made a commitment that he would come back after the war if he survived and kill that woman.
Yeah.
And I thought, so here's a person who's all these terrible things happen, and the first person he wants to take revenge on is a regular citizen living outside the camp. And he later remarks in the book that he mentioned there were over 10,000 camps, and in that camp alone that he was in, there were thousands of troops, 500 of them women, guards, that lived regular lives when they got left work. And he couldn't believe that there were that many people who were okay with what was happening, that could turn an eye to it. And so when I read your book, I thought, you know what? It's the same principle, and what I want to do is draw parallels to what we have happening today, because it's always, that could never happen. There's never been anybody like Hitler, never will be again. But I feel like that's not true. The ideology exists. It changes, it evolves, it comes in stronger and smaller waves. But the general idea of wanting to control people's lives, of wanting to manage their affairs and eliminate political opponents, whatever the reason, is always here. There's nothing new under the sun.
Sure, that we are smarter than you, and that because of the stupidity of the American voter, we have to make sure that certain things are done in a certain way so that we can get you the result that you really need, whether you think you want it or not.
That was a great Gruber impression. That was impressive.
Yeah, well, it's pretty sick, and that's why I wrote the book. I wrote it in such a way that it never says Republican or Democrat. It never says conservative or liberal. And I wanted to write it in such a way that anybody could read it in 15 minutes and that people could pass it around. Because, the thing that I think a lot of people miss, TJ, is when we talk about the truth, that's one thing. The truth is one thing. There's some of the truth and there's something that's nearly the truth, but the truth is one thing. And I think people forget we tend not to look at things from different angles. And so, we all know, for the truth shall set you free, for you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. Everybody's heard that, but nobody ever considers the inverse of that. Okay, so if you don't know the truth, is it possible that because of that you could be placed in bondage? And obviously it is. Whether it's financial bondage or actual physical bondage behind a fence, it's been proven true over and over again, because it's the first tactic of a people. It's the first tactic of a government seeking to move its people into a place or a situation of its own choosing. It's the first tactic, is to lie to them.
It's interesting when you say that. I've always considered, the things that are written in Scripture. We know that the prophets had a job they were tasked to write history, to write Scripture and Revelation so that it would be preserved for future generations. I happen to believe that of all the prophets that have lived, we probably have a very small percentage of those writings. So there's a reason that we have those. And you always ask, why was this said? Why do we have this information? If we're told the truth sets you free, why is it important to know that? And I think you're exactly right, because the assumption's made that most of us then are not free. And why is that? What have we done? I mean, we're agents unto ourselves, right? So what has precluded us from becoming free? And so as you say that, I like to also mention another axiom, which is that all sin is based on deception. Anyone who behaves in a manner that's contrary to our spiritual nature is first deceiving themselves or deceiving someone else. And so I love the theme. I think that it's so important for people to learn when they're being lied to and when someone doesn't have their best interest at heart, and to see the big picture. And we talk about comparing it to today, and you mentioned you don't talk about political parties, but just recently in the news.
No, I just said I didn't talk about them in the book.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
because I want the book to be of use to people to change somebody's mind. When this book came out, I did an interview on MSNBC, and 2 days later, I got a call on my cell phone, and it said blocked call. and blocked call to me at that time. That was either Nancy Lopez or Bill Gaither. And so I answered the phone. Well, it was a lady on there, and it was the wife of one of our Supreme Court justices. And so she told me how she got the phone number, and she said, hey, we read your books, we've run them through our family. We love what you do. She said, but I have to tell you, I saw you on MSNBC yesterday, and I was very disappointed. And I was like, oh my gosh,
Go on.
Yeah, I said, I'm sorry. What did I do? She said, well, it isn't what you did, it's what you didn't do. And I said, oh, okay, what didn't I do? And she said, you had him right where you wanted him. You had him right there, and you had him discussing this, discussing the lines, discussing the government. You had him right there, and you did not tell him, look, you better understand that if you don't do this and if we don't do this. She said, you had him right there, and you didn't tell him. And I took a breath, and I said, you know what? You're exactly right. I did not tell him. I said, can I tell you why I didn't tell him? And she said, sure, I would love to know. And I said, okay. I said, I believe that we are all in sales. And she said, what? I'm not in sales. I said, oh, really? I said, do you have kids? She said, yes. I said, then you're in sales. I said, you're married, right? She said, yes. I said, you're in sales. I said, if you got a great marriage, you're just better at sales than a lot of people. And she laughed. And I said, so we're all selling an opinion. We're selling a truth. We're selling our
stock.
ideas. Yeah. And I said most people do not understand that the essence of leadership is influence, and the essence of influence is agreement, not disagreement. The essence of influence is agreement, not disagreement. I said, now, if you look at us and them, if you look at Republicans and Democrats, if you look at conservatives and liberals for years and years and years, I said, we've been yakking at each other since God was a boy. And I'm not sure anybody has ever, like right in the middle of an argument, had anybody say, you know what? Holy cow, you're exactly right. Okay, I'm on your side now. I said, has that ever happened? I said, so at some point, I said, you have to understand that we kind of come at each other with a set of beliefs. Now, whether those beliefs are true or not, I said, that's not up for debate on our side. I said, because I think that we can kind of look and we can see what has happened. I said, but they come to us with a set of beliefs that to have those beliefs shifted, they have to actually listen and think and go through a process. And I said, and that takes a moment of a moment that there is a disarmament needed. And what I'm saying is that if we want people to come around our way of thinking, if we want people to buy what we're selling, if we want people to believe like we believe, it really does help if they like us a little bit right at the first, because they'll listen. And I said, and so what I wanted to do is find a way in this book. It was my way. The little black 15-minute read, How Do You Kill 11 Million People? I wanted something cheap enough and little enough that people could buy 10 of them and give them to their liberal friends and say, hey, this is very curious. And the title would grab them, that the liberal friend wouldn't open it up and go, bah, I know what this is, and throw it away.
Right.
I wanted them to read it because you cannot dispute what is in this book, not just the history, but I think you can't dispute some of the conclusions in here. And I mean, you've read it, but when you come to some of the ideas, some of the conclusions about like here's what I'm just holding the book right here. And I said, look, the danger to America is not a single politician with ill intent, or even a group of them. The most dangerous thing any nation faces is a citizenry capable of trusting a liar to lead them. It's us. It's not them.
It's very true. I'm curious because I attack a little more viciously, but usually it's because of the people that we already like each other. So it's a different story. But I always go back to that. I'm like, my litmus test is always, look, because I get accused of oversimplifying things. No, it's simple. Does something bring you closer to freedom or closer to bondage? Does it bring you more freedom or does it take it away from you? Let's start with that. If being lied to gets you closer to freedom, then it's a good thing. But that's rarely the case. So just recently, I wrote down a list. You've got Gruber, who came out and was very proud of the fact that they were able to deceive enough people to get what they wanted done for their own good. I say, is that a good thing that gets you closer to freedom? If you're really that stupid that you need to be lied to, then are you really that stupid? Why don't they just tell you the truth? And I don't know if I asked that question the right way, but seriously, think about it. Like, if you're so stupid, they wouldn't need to lie to you. So ask yourself the question, why do you need to be lied to? And if they're willing to admit smugly that they're lying to you, where does that road go? And then you look at, Obama recently came out and basically, here's the thing that gets me when you talk about Hitler, which always is going to end the conversation immediately. I wish he'd been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, because maybe this conversation would be easier to have. Because they liked Hitler. He was a popular guy for a while.
It kills me to hear people say, well, when Hitler took over, when the Nazis took over. Look, Hitler didn't take over. He was elected.
They loved him.
He was elected. Now, curiously, he was elected with 17% of the vote. Okay. And how in the world can somebody, with 17% of the population voting for him, how could you be elected with 17% of the population voting for you? Well, because people didn't vote.
Right.
Because everybody said, that's never going to happen here. Well, you look at our situation in America, in the past 25 years, there's not been a single presidential election that has been won by more than 10 million votes. They've all been that close. And yet, in the past 25 years, there's not been a single presidential election in which fewer than 100 million people of voting age didn't bother to vote.
It's true. I was reading Patriots History of the United States, and they're going through election numbers in the mid-1800s around the Civil War up to the turn of the century. And they talk about the popular vote, 6 million votes to 7 or 8 million votes. And on a percentage of people in the country, well more people voted back then than vote now.
Well, if you look, TJ, you look at blocks, you look at a Christian vote. Conservatives could take any election, any part of any election, if we would somehow actually vote. I think, when you say that your friends say you're oversimplifying things, listen, if things aren't simple, maybe I'm just an idiot, but if things aren't simple, I can't understand their power. And so I need to simplify things. If you look, so many people think, our government's just so complicated right now. And
exactly.
To a degree, I understand that. But I also understand that there are 545 human beings who are in our country right now directly, legally, morally, individually, in every way responsible for every problem we face right now. And if you look at some of the things and you just ask the questions, and I put this in the book. You ever wonder why America doesn't have a balanced budget? Well, have you ever in your life heard a politician who wasn't for a balanced budget? Have you wondered why we have this complicated tax code that ordinary people can't even understand? Well, have you ever heard of a politician say, gosh, we are proud of this tax code and proud of this complicated system? No. What do politicians say? We need to simplify the tax code. Okay, so why is it not done? Well, you would assume it hadn't been done because somebody is keeping it from being done. All right, here we go. Here's you can just absolutely shake hands with the 545 men and women who enact every law, propose every budget, they set every policy enforced on the citizens of the United States. We got one president, 9 Supreme Court justices, 100 senators, and 435 members of Congress. And by the way, have you ever noticed, talking about lying, you ever noticed that if one of us lies to them, it's a felony? But if they lie to us, it's politics.
Yeah, I sent the IRS a letter that I was $35,000 behind on my taxes because of TurboTax, and I couldn't find any emails to prove it. So, signed sincerely, Tim Geithner and Lois Lerner. I don't know. We'll see if they think it's funny.
Well, let's see, 35,000 in taxes. You could also send them a letter and say here's $10. Here's a hammer, 5 paper clips, and a couple of screws. And according to your own Pentagon spending, reports, that should cover the $35,000.
They'll be gold plated. No, you said something really important earlier when, I take pride when someone says you're oversimplifying it, because we've all heard the quote that any intelligent fool can make things bigger and more complex. And this has been attributed to several people, but it does take a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction. When something's complicated, there are forces that are working against your best interest. There's a reason it's complicated. Someone's agenda dictates that it be that. So anytime someone says, "Oh, it's more complicated than that," so yeah, because someone wants you to suffer at their expense. That's my simplified view of the world, which is why, like you mentioned, every politician wants to simplify the tax code and to shrink the government, and it never happens.
Yeah, if it's complicated, somebody's lying to you, or there's money being wasted.
There you go. I have a list in my office of the 10 Commandments, and next to it is the rules for radicals, because they're not exactly they don't correlate so well, but there are some interesting distinctions between the two. And one of them talks about the two main sources of power. The first rule of radicals is that power is not only what you have, but what the enemy thinks you have. And it's derived from money and people. And Saul Alinsky said that have-nots must build power from flesh and blood because these things have a plentiful supply. And to me, it may not sound like that's related, but it is. The power is in the ability to manipulate people by deceiving them.
It's true. And it's very true. I work with a lot of corporations, and I work with football teams and organizations. I do a lot of that. And one of the things that's been very funny to me, and I bring this, I bring this to the table as somewhat of an expert on lies, I suppose, which is kind of a dubious distinction, isn't it? But I have been amazed with a football team that's seeking to gain an edge that you can even use with a crowd or with the other team. What somebody believes is so strong that they will act on that belief, whether it is true or not. I'll give you an example. We had, I can't say who this was, but we had a situation with one of the teams that I was working with, and I have my hand in 5 of the last 6 BCS national championships, several Super Bowl champions. So I worked with some pretty cool coaches and successful teams. We had a situation where this one team was heading into a stadium that was known for being so loud that nobody could hear. That even the left tackle could not hear the quarterback screaming signals. And so this team would gain a lot of advantage just by the false starts on the offense of the other team, the visiting teams. And so you look, and there's different ways that has been handled. And now in college, there's no helmet thing, all right? You know what I'm saying? There's no speaker inside the helmet.
Right.
They use that in the pros now, but in college, there's no speaker inside the helmet. And so we look, and I was looking and saying, okay, well, if the crowd, because I don't know, you've probably been to college football games, and on third down, third and short, what do? You make as much noise as you possibly can. You scream. I mean, I've watched my boys. We sit there at a game, go, just as loud as you can, stomping our hands, stomping our feet, clapping our hands.
Right.
Just make as much noise as you can. Okay, well, why do we do that? We do that because we know we could actually contribute to the outcome of the game here. We could actually cause these guys to have a false start. We could be that, 12th man, so to speak. Okay, so what if the crowd believes that has been covered? What if the crowd believes that they're not having any effect at all, that all you're doing is just like ripping your throat out, all you're doing is making yourself tired? And so if you believe that you are not having an effect, you're a lot less likely to do that. So I had a coach make, in just his regular press conference that week, which everybody's spying on everybody, in his regular press conference, they asked about the noise in the stadium, and the coach said, he kind of chuckled and he said, well, we're not worried about that at all. And the press guy said, why are you not worried about it at all? And he said, well, frankly, we've got that covered. And I said, how do you have it covered? He said, well, I can't say, but there's a technology is perfectly within the rules, and we've got it covered. And they can yell all they want, but we can hear very clearly, just like I'm hearing you. And they're like, really? And so, they measured the decibels at the stadium, and it had gotten out, and they even talked about it in the pregame thing on the television stuff. It had gotten out, and it reduced the noise by 30%, just because people go, it's not going to help. I'm not going to do it, and it wasn't true. It was just what they believed.
It reminds me of what they do with the early polling. Early polls when on voting day, right? Come out and say, well, this person's well ahead. So it's to discourage people from behaving the way that they otherwise would or should.
Exactly.
And it's all based on deception. And that's actually a salient story to me, because I used to work for the Phoenix Suns. I was a trampoline acrobat. I was an artist.
Really?
I was. So there was the gorilla, there was myself, and there were a couple other individuals, and we used to flip and spin and do all kinds of cool basketball tricks. But my superior, I'm a realist, right? I live in Realville, and my superior was adamant that if we lost a game, it was our fault. It was game operations that didn't do enough to get the crowd involved to the point where the team was victorious. It's kind of like when you go bowling and you just expect, or at least someone in the crowd expects, that they're going to get a strike every time they throw a bowling ball. Even though the guys that are on ESPN 8 can't do it on the Pro Bowling Tour, or whatever it's called.
Right.
Us amateurs believe that that's what's going to happen when we bowl. So when we were dunking, if the game ended, especially because we made the playoffs 5 years in a row when I was there. I got there the year Steve Nash did. We were a good team. And we would scream and yell, and the crowd would go ballistic. And if we lost by 1 point, we'd have that post game where you would have thought we were in the SEC after the Sugar Bowl, and the coach was so disappointed. He would just rail on us for not stepping up and doing our part. And I just would sit there and go, this is insanity. It's late. I want to go.
Paul Westphal is a good friend of mine, by the way, and he's a guy that I work with.
You're kidding. I didn't know that.
Yep.
My wife she wants to marry Jeff Hornacek still, but she would probably settle for Paul Westphal if you made her choose. That's really interesting. Well, I think we're going to wrap things up here, but what's the major takeaway? I've got this list of things I could have spent all day talking with you about. For me, I look at recent history and I see the executive amnesty speech that Obama gave the other night, where it's clear to me, there are video clips on the news afterwards of him saying things like, well, the rules don't allow me to do this, and I'm the president, I'm not an emperor, and Congress is in charge, and executive amnesty wouldn't even apply. And only a matter of months later, it's, hey, look, they're not doing it, I'm doing it, and I'm in my legal right. And like you said before, it's not just Obama. It's not Gruber saying the lack of transparency is a huge advantage. It's not Holder or Lerner or Clinton or Rice. It's afterwards, the talking heads. They get these guys. One was an attorney, and he's like, look, he's making an emotional appeal that there are people who are hurting, and there are people here living in the shadows, and it has nothing to do with the rule of law, but basically, essentially trying to persuade people. The leadership capital you mentioned, he's spending it to try to get people persuaded that this is actually a good thing, even though it's against the interests of so many and the country as a whole. And to me, that's the problem. And Jay Sukalo was on the other side of the panel, someone who I have a lot of respect for, and said, hey, you're an attorney and you're a great attorney and you've got a great heart, but you're just wrong about this. And I'm the guy who says, wait a minute, why do we say all those things? Why do we say you've got a great heart? I know your heart's in the right place. Like, these are dangerous activities and beliefs and creeds to be pushing on people. To me, that's not someone who has a good heart. They either don't know or they don't care. Either way, the end result is it will do harm to freedom-loving Americans. So why do we concede that everyone's got a good heart, whether or not they're doing things that hurt others?
That's a good point. You either don't know or you don't care. And it's a scary thing. I think it falls into, and I know we're closing here, but I think it falls into why people accept lies. I think it's why we are actually oddly willing to be lied to. And unfortunately, TJ, that puts us as conservatives in a bit of a disadvantage. And it's because our hearts, I believe, I'm not Pollyanna, but I do believe that for the most part, our hearts are in the right place. And so when somebody says we don't expect somebody to lie. We don't walk around every day with a cynical view of the world. And so if I walked up to you in a restaurant and said, TJ, hey, how are you doing? And we talked for a second. And I said, did you know Robert Redford is right outside? Okay, well, you would totally go with that. You'd totally believe it because why would I possibly lie about it? And so you would totally believe it. So we kind of go for that. Now, most of us have been taught, you tell the truth. You tell the truth. I mean, our parents told us, I'm only going to spank you if you lie to me. You tell me the truth, then we can talk it all through. And so most of us have been taught to tell the truth. And so, I advise people running for office. I do some work with people behind the scenes. And one of the things I tell them, I say, look, because I only work on this side, and I say, look, you are determined to tell the truth, and that is a good thing. I said, but here's what you have to understand, because what I end up hearing from conservatives running for office all the time is the same thing I saw in the last presidential campaign. I hear conservative Republicans running for office, and they say, look, I don't want to bring that up because that's just kind of, I don't want to say that to them, and I don't want to bring that up because that's going to hurt some people, and I don't want to. And I said, look, is it the truth? Well, yeah, it's the truth, but I just don't think that should be a part of this. And I say, look, here's what I want you to understand. You are in a war. You're in a war for the hearts and minds, for the soul of this country. We have already gone well past what the normal civilization kind of lasts. I mean, we're on borrowed time already, and you're in a war for the heart, mind, and soul of America. And so you got to understand that you are determined to tell the truth, and you are telling me that you will not tell all of it. On the other side, you have somebody who is not determined to tell the truth, and they will lie about anything. Do you really think you're going to win? How do you have a chance? You got people out there who believe they believe whatever sounds good, and whatever, and you and I both know we could go out there and we could make up some outrageous, crazy lie about somebody and just go up and just tell somebody this crazy lie, and then 2 minutes later tell them, you know what, I just made that up. I just made it up. And I said, you know what? For the rest of their life, every time that guy's face came into their mind, every time that guy's face came on television, every time his name came up, even though they knew it was a lie, they'd still be thinking it. They'd still be thinking it. And here you're determined not to tell the whole truth. Come on.
It's true. I think about, when you bring up the story, I think about Joe Wilson. And if you look up Joe Wilson on Wikipedia, the first thing it says, in a breach of decorum, Wilson pointed out to Obama and shouted, "You lie." And I thought he was lying, but because it's a breach of decorum and because it's not considered acceptable in those circles, in your book, you mentioned that civilizations, great civilizations, come with an expiration date. I think you mentioned 200 years. I had Lawrence Reed on, and we talked about the rise and fall of the Roman civilization. And you can cite others where they started off with rules of decorum and with certain customs and protocols where decency was the norm of the day. So even in this example of Jay Sukol saying, hey, you're a good guy and you've got a great heart and you're a great lawyer, I'm thinking, Alinsky dedicated his book to Lucifer, the king of deception, the first radical, the person who knows how we like to behave. He knows our rule book and our playbook, and they use it to their advantage. In my opinion, if a politician's not willing to call a lie, then he's looking out for himself and not the people he represents. Because ultimately, either we're going to get to the point where we're okay pointing out when people are lying to us, or we're just going to fade away, and there's nothing we can do about it. And so for me, I mentioned
by the way, talking about the Roman Empire, you know what the last straw was, right?
Go ahead.
You know what? The last thing that happened, and it was all over, they opened the borders. Look at history. Read it. I mean, it's not hidden in there, but that's the last thing. I mean, it was, they talk about the rise and fall. Well, there is a long rise, and there is a long list of things that happened to create the fall of the Roman Empire. And we've covered them, but I want to tell you, brother, the last one on the list is when they opened the borders.
For the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. Do you think that's applicable to what we're talking about?
Yeah, it is. It's really scary to me because I believe that there's, and I know you can divide people up into many different ways, but for these purposes here, let me just say there are three kinds of people. I think there are the foolish, there are the wise, and there are the evil. Now, fortunately, I don't believe there are many evil. Unfortunately, I don't think there are many wise. But man, there's a ton of foolish people out there. And these foolish people are always looking to lean one way or another. And they are either being drawn to the evil message or the wise message. And it's an odd thing to consider, but it's something that I think we better consider and understand how to draw foolish people our way. Because even with the thing that the guy, the stupidity of the American voter and all that went on, the challenge is that the vast majority of those American voters that they targeted, the vast majority of those people didn't hear him say it, and if they did hear him say it, they didn't know he was talking about them.
Right. He wasn't talking about people who didn't vote for it, so it kind of narrows it down.
So that's a vast majority of the foolish there, and that's how something we have to do to bring them our way.
Well, Mr. Andrews, I thank you for your time. I would like to make sure people know where they can learn more about you, where they can buy your books, where they can absorb the rest of the knowledge that we don't have time to impart to them today.
Well, I'm andyandrews.com, and I'm on Facebook. Find Andy Andrews and click like. I will be your friend. And I also have a podcast called In the Loop with Andy Andrews, and where we talk about thinking and talk about parenting and talk about business. And man, I sure appreciate you. I really appreciate you and what you're doing, and the young conservatives. And even though I don't know that I'm necessarily young anymore. I'm 55, finally reached the speed limit. But I really, really enjoy being a part of this. And I think it's critical.
Well, I sure appreciate that. I didn't know you had the podcast. I'll definitely check it out because I'm a podcast fanboy, but I really like the books that I've read of yours so far, and there's a lot of them, so it's going to take me a while to get through the rest, but I encourage people to do that. And why don't you mention 2 of your other titles you'd recommend people to go out and start with to get to know you a little better?
The Traveler's Gift is probably the one that is the best known, and then The Noticer. The Noticer also has the Noticer Returns attached to it, but The Noticer and The Traveler's Gift, both of them available, anywhere.
As Benjamin Franklin said, it's a republic if we can keep it. So thanks for doing your part. Keep fighting.
Thank you, TJ.
You're listening to the absolute unadulterated truth, courtesy of the Oh Hale Yeah Show. Want more? Hale yeah, you do.
I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to the Young Cons podcast on iTunes or SoundCloud. And make sure to check us out online at youngcons.com/podcast. Or chat us up on Twitter at RealTJ Hale.